Sekarang ini dia beli plate mana?
Ada sih. I don't know.
Ada di plate mana? Three. What do you go? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sultan Dalai. Okay. Iowa. I don't know.
I'm better than I was yesterday. Oh, yesterday. What is not move? I mean, look at it. And you guys can get away with it. We can't.
Wait, what will do? That doesn't happen like I pay for every chunk I put in my mouth.
We on the front. Doesn't mean you are.
But that is necessary.
It must be something you said. That's so recognized. What do you say?
Firstly, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Lula Mamtanga. I am chairing these public hearings in the absence of the chairperson of this inquiry, Professor Helton Chittle, who, due to circumstances beyond his control and the Commission's control, could not make it this week. I'm assisted by two colleagues who come from the Competition Commission, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves. And thereafter, I would like you to also introduce yourselves, and then I'll probably comment after that.
Good afternoon. My name is Sunal Grimbeek. I'm a principal economist at the Commission, and I'm also leading the technical team that's working on the grocery retail inquiry.
Good afternoon. My name is Thabo Khumalo. I'm a senior legal counsel working with the retail inquiry team.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Vani Chetty from Vani Chetty Competition Law. I have representatives, and I'll get them to introduce themselves directly as well. But on my left is Mark Weiner, who is the chairman of Redefine, and on my right, the director of Redefine is David Rice.
Thanks. I'm Mark Weiner, chairman of Redefine. Happy to be here and hope to be of assistance.
Thank you. I'm David Rice, the Chief Operating Officer of Redefine.
Thank you. Is the surname Weiner? Weiner.
W-A-I-N-E-R.
Sure. Okay, I've got it. Okay. Thank you very much. I understand from Ms. Chetty that you will, you would prefer that we proceed by way of us asking questions, and you don't have any presentation that you would like to make. Do you have any opening remarks that you want to make at all? Nothing?
Yes, thank you. I think that, first of all, congratulations to the Commission for conducting the inquiry. Of course, as landlords, our concern is exclusivity clauses. And the way the industry has evolved over the years, the need for them, the not need for them. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to, and we are happy, in fact, to take any questions of any nature whatsoever and answer them to the best of our ability. We don't have presentations. We're here to try and assist by answering any concerns or questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Weiner. Mr. Weiner, can you start by just telling us who Redefine Properties is? And also, as you tell us who you are, do try, in the end, try and focus on the relevance to this inquiry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Redefine is a listed REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust. It is the second largest one in South Africa. We have a South African portfolio of about 80 billion rand, of which 41% is in retail throughout the country. We cover everything from regional shopping malls to smaller rural shopping centres. We do have two shopping centres, at least two shopping centres that are in townships, fairly large ones. We are committed to South Africa. We are trying to create jobs in South Africa, and we are trying to assist people to grow in South Africa.
When you place yourself as second, are you second in the in that global portfolio of 80 billion, or are you second in the retail?
No, we are second in terms of size in South Africa. Growth Point is the largest. Mm-hmm. We have a market capitalization of about 63 billion rand. Mm-hmm. So our total assets are just under 100 billion, but some of that is offshore. So 80 billion is the South African portfolio, and roughly 40% of that 30 billion odd is in retail.
And that is retail in South Africa?
Retail in South Africa.
And then you also mentioned that you've got two shopping centres in the townships. large shopping centers in the townships.
Yeah, I think
Can you
is that right?
specify which township, which shopping centers are those?
Sure, the one is Chris Hani, Vosloorus, and the other one is Mapanya Mall.
Chrisani in Vosloorus. How big are those centers, Sam?
So Mapanya Mall is approximately 70,000 square meters, and Chris Hani is approximately 35.
We have always been, before we deal with the specific questions that were sent to you, there's a bit of a background that I would like to touch on. I won't be long on it. We've always been curious as to how malls have been built in the townships, and we've had submissions coming through. I think our curiosity arises from the submissions that have been made by individuals who've appeared before us, who seem rather surprised how the malls came to be in the townships. Can you tell us, in relation to your two malls that you own in Vosloorus and in Soweto, Mapanya Mall, as to how you came to be involved in those developments, who the owners of the land were, and how you, the whole background to those properties.
Okay, so starting with Soweto, Mapanya Mall was built by Dr. Mapanya. He got into some financial difficulties with his partner. We were approached and we stepped in and assisted him. So we own 50% and he owns 50%. 51%, 49% to him, and we helped him fund that. In Vosloorus, again, that was developed by another company, McCormack, and we were able to purchase a 50% share in that one. So we weren't involved in the initial feasibility or the development. Those were purchased by us when they were already developed.
And so you came in but you did come in at the early stages of the malls, of those developments.
They were already up and trading.
Up and trading with both of them.
Both of them.
All right. So you were not involved in deciding the tenant mix as to who the anchor tenant must be?
No, we inherited that, but obviously we've made changes to a number of the tenants in the centres. We also developed, it's not in a township, are we talking rural now or just township?
We're just talking I was just talking on these two specific
On those
malls.
two, no. So the anchor tenants were in place and there were changes made to other tenants in the malls, and the malls expanded and so on.
Okay. When you say malls expanded, have both Mapanya Mall and the Chris Hani one been expanded?
David?
So there are plans in place to expand Chris Hani by approximately another 10,000 square meters.
To 45?
To 45. Mapanya Mall hasn't recently been expanded, no. Sorry, we have looked at feasibilities to see if it is possible.
Okay. And then you also, Mr. Weiner, you mentioned that you came in and made changes. Are the changes that you're referring to specific to these two malls?
Well, changes are specific to any mall. So
okay.
when you look at it, you see how tenants are trading. So you might find one of your other tenants not doing well because they were given space that was too large or too small. So you change that around.
Do you own any malls in the rural areas?
Yes, we do quite a number.
Okay, can you touch on those? I don't know how long a list it is, but you could maybe mention the provinces or the towns.
So if we take Northwest, which is our most recent one,
yes.
Klerksdorp, just outside of the town, we constructed 60,000 square meter shopping mall, where we developed that in partnership with a developer who had acquired the land over a period of time from the local authority. There were court cases involved in that. Other developers tried to stop the development, Eventually everything came through, so we were involved on a joint venture on the development, on the leasing, selecting the majors and all the tenants, and so on. That opened about 2 years ago.
Okay. Is that the only?
No, that's the most recent one. We've got that's a large and recent one. We've got various malls like Isipingo in Natal, Acorn Hook, Matsama in Matsama Plaza. David can tell you, Mpumalanga, Bester Brown in Nelspruit. So we have a number of many centres of smaller size in a lot of small towns.
Okay, can you just specify maybe the provinces where you are located then in the rural areas?
So in KZN,
Yeah.
Mpumalanga, Northwest. Yeah, that's sorry, and the Free State.
The Free State, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Are there, just looking at the first question, are there any specific considerations and do these considerations differ when you as a property developer initiate a development in an urban area, in a township area, or in a rural area?
Yes, most definitely. So if we start, let's say, with the rural area, assuming we won't go through a process of rezoning land, we would buy land that's already rezoned simply because of the time it takes, the obstacles, corruption, etc. So we will only look at a piece of land that has already got zoning or very close to being zoned. What we then look at is the population in the area, the LSMs, what kind of employment there is, and who is the employer. So is it predominantly mining? Let's say it's the Rustenburg area, or is it agriculture? Is it manufacturing? What's the possibility of the sustainability of jobs? And very important to us is, where do the people currently have to go and shop? Do they have to take taxis and travel 30, 40 kilometers? Or is there something close by? Also, if we're going to develop in a rural area, we generally want to be able to develop of a size so that we do become the dominant mall. So probably nothing under 15 or 20,000 square meters to start.
Okay. You mentioned that one of the considerations would be the LSM categories in the area. When you do look at the LSM categories, how do these once you've made a decision as to what is the majority of the LSM category that this mall will cater to, how would that influence your choice of an anchor tenant? And typically, which anchor tenants would you find most suitable for like a rural?
Okay, so if you've got a lower LSM, your food anchor by preference would be a ShopRite or a Checkers, not a Pick and Pay, simply because of the pricing points. Spar maybe as a second, Woolworths in a low LSM, no. So your tenant mix is impacted by the purchasing power of the population, but to some extent that's also been negated, not dramatically, but it has been negated since social grants were introduced, because obviously that has increased the spending power of people in the area. So for us, we look at what is it that they're going to, particularly when they have to travel long distances, what is it that they're going to shop for, and what are they going to do. But I mean, common sense tells you that in these areas, you are going to have your grocery anchor, you're going to have a Pep Stores or an Ackermans. You're not going to put Louis Vuitton in Botshabella.
Okay, can you just explain to us what was the situation, or what was the situation like, or what decision would you have to, what decisions did you have to make prior to social grants being dispensed in those areas, and then what became the situation after the social grants? We just want to understand the two
Well,
scenarios.
prior to social grants being so important, it wasn't viable for the retailers to operate in those areas. There wasn't enough spending power. So social grants accelerated the development of shopping malls or smaller shopping complexes in rural areas. Without that additional spend, there wouldn't have been an economic motivation for the retailers to be there. Without retailers, the developers won't build.
Okay. And then your choice, your considerations in the rural areas, are they totally different to those in the townships?
Not totally different, but generally speaking, it would be smaller because the populations are smaller. So the size of your footprint is going to be smaller. In the townships, you would go for a 30 to 40,000 square meter, even less, 25,000 in a township, because your townships obviously are much bigger and they have bigger populations, and there's, generally speaking, much more competition from other shopping facilities.
So you're saying that the shopping center in the township would be smaller?
No, the shopping center in the township would be larger than in a rural area generally.
So the rural township, the rural shopping center would be the 30 to 40,000 square meter that you mentioned?
In the rural area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
For us, some people will do smaller. They could do 5,000 or 6,000.
Okay.
And there is a trend at the moment for bigger centres to be built
In the rural areas?
in the rural areas, yeah. But
What is influencing, what is the driver behind that trend?
the numbers and spending power in the area.
And what has influenced the spending power?
Again, I
Social
think
grants.
social grants.
Social grants?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what's also important, Chairperson, is when you talk about a township, if we talk about Soweto, you could be having a shopping mall in a number of places. You could be in Baragwanath, you could be in Protea Glen. So it's not like a rural area where it's a relatively small contained area.
Yes.
Soweto is a big place.
Okay. And then again, when you look at it at the township, would your consideration of who becomes an anchor tenant for the shopping center be different to the considerations that you would have made in relation to a rural area?
I think your choice of who your anchor is going to be is very much dependent on demographics. So again, if we were doing a new shopping centre in Protea Glen, that might be good for a Pick and Pay, whereas a Baragwanath might suit a ShopRite. So you have to look at who is your customer and what is their preference. We can't ideally impose a tenant on a population or your potential shopper who's not going to be well accepted by them. So it varies from area to area. We look at every development and we say, what is the right tenant mix for this, after a whole process of looking at where the people shop, interviewing, having groups, etc. Who do you prefer?
And then when you make a decision as to how big that anchor tenant should be, is that your decision or is it a joint decision between yourselves and the anchor tenant as to how big the store should be?
We have a wish list, so we might start off and say 3,000 or 3,500 square meters for a Checkers, and when they do their numbers, they'll come back and say 2,500, or they might want more, they might want less. So they do their own studies independently of ours.
So they'll do their own market studies.
Correct.
So, how do you conduct those studies? Do you employ people from the area, or what do you base it on?
So there are a number of companies who do demographic studies. They'll go out, they'll look at the size of the populations, the LSMs. They'll come back and tell you this area needs so many square meters for food, so many for fashion, this and the other. We start with that, and then we do our own, because in all my years in property, I've never seen one of those come back and say a shopping centre is not required.
So how reliable are they in terms of the demographics?
Oh, they're pretty good. I think they're pretty good. I think they tend to usually overestimate the size that's required. So they'll tell you this area can have 60,000 square meters, and it's probably 35. So, these are all business decisions, and at the end of the day, if somebody tells you, or you think you can build a 50,000 square meter center, ideally you want between 60 to 70% of your tenants to be national tenants, so that your food anchors plus your ancillary tenants. So if you're not going to fill it on that basis, build a smaller center.
Yeah, I mean, my previous question is predicated on the examples you used with Baragwana and Proteas land. I mean, isn't the LSM categories the same in, say, Baragwana, Diepkloof area and Proteas land?
Not quite, I don't think. I think the way we perceive it at the moment, Protea Glen has become very aspirational. It's slightly more expensive in terms of housing, the rest of it. So the people there are generally more employed, state employees, government employees, people who are more affluent or have more disposable income than somebody living in Diepkloof or somewhere else. So each one, I'm not an expert, but we evaluated each one on its merits. We visit, we walk, we talk.
And that mix of 70% national is it also based on the similar considerations?
It's just that security of income, and what we find is that your smaller tenants and your line shops are quite difficult to fill. So you need that mix. In order for a shopping centre to be successful, somebody needs to be able to go there and basically find more or less everything that they want under one roof. So you need your food anchor, you need your Truworths, your Fashini, depending on, and it might be Ackermans and Pep in a different area, but you need a range of fashion, you need food, you need your cell phone shops. Do you need to have all 3 cell phone shops, or 2 or 1, depending on what happens? So all of these things we have to go through and say, does it work?
Typically the retailers do a similar exercise, and they identify for themselves what they think is the optimum space that they would require.
I have heard the term being mentioned that when malls or shopping centers were being considered for townships and the rural areas, the basis for, or the justification for these for the centers would be that these areas were underserviced. What exactly do we mean by underserviced? Because in my understanding that there would have been operators, there would have been retailers in those areas, the bakeries, butcheries operating. So what is meant by underservice in this context that would justify a shopping center as opposed to what was in existence?
So in these areas, as I alluded to earlier, you do have local operators, be they spaza shops, butchers, bakers, bottle stores, shebeens, whatever they might be. But what you will find is that particularly month end or on a weekend, people who are traveling, so let's say the next shopping centre is 30 or 35 kilometres away, 40, they'll be getting into taxis, doing the bulk of their shopping there and using the local retailers for filling. And that's what we mean by underserviced, because for those people to have to travel 30 or 40 kilometers to do their weekly or monthly shop is a hassle. And that cries out for a shopping centre, into which hopefully some of those local operators will become what we call the mom and pop shops, the local independent retailers.
Okay, can you make an example of that for me, just to understand, not that I understand the area very well, but I do understand that there were, for example, in Soweto, there was a mall, there was in Jabulani, there was an area where there were
Jabulani Mall?
Jabulani Mall, which was operating way back in the day. And then now there's a new, is there, I think there's a shopping center in the area, a new development in the area. What would have been considered, what would have been considered as an under-service in that area?
So it's a good question. So Jabulani Mall is a large mall. It's not one of ours, but it's certainly bigger than ours. It's owned by Resilient. It's the dominant mall probably in Soweto. And somebody, I'm not 100% sure, but I think built or is building a shopping center nearby with the tower, what do they call those cooling towers or whatever, by the lake. They were building something there. It's much smaller. I'm not sure they can get the right tenants. But if, for example, Jabulani has a Checkers and a ShopRite, but no Woolworths or no Spar, maybe they're able to get a tenant there. Also, the kind of shopping centre, because if you go to Jabulani, it's an enclosed mall, so it's not convenience. So you can't just pop in or get out of your car, go in and buy a litre of milk and drive out. You've got to walk all the way through. So as those become more successful, more convenience type retail, smaller centres, easier access, just drive in, strip shopping become also convenient, because the big malls get very busy and it becomes a hassle sometimes to shop. So anything from a garage shop to a mall is a retailer, and they are competitive at different times, opening, closing times, convenience, all the rest of it.
We've also had, okay, you've touched on this point on competition. So so you are saying that a mall could compete with a convenience center and any retailer in the area, depending on what factors you are.
Every single person who sells something from a hawker to a garage shop to a hypermarket are competing for somebody's rand, and it's a question of price, position, where you're located, convenience, and all of these things. So a garage shop is open generally 24 hours a day. Shopping centres trade normal hours. So if you need bread and milk, or in my case cigarettes at 10 o'clock at night, you're not going to get it in the shopping centre.
So does distance matter? I mean, and if you can maybe cover these three different broad areas. So does it matter how far the garage shop is from the mall, or
not necessarily? I mean, if I leave here now, okay, and I'm going back home, and I go past Brooklyn Mall, and I need a packet of cigarettes, I'm not going to Brooklyn Mall for cigarettes. I'll look for the nearest garage shop that's the closest to that. You get shopping malls that can be opposite each other, but is the offering any different? So one might have a Pick and Pay, one might have a ShopRite, one might have a better offering in terms of fashion to the other, or they may not be different at all. And the only reason you've got two shopping centres, both which aren't great, is because there was an exclusivity clause and Checkers couldn't open, so somebody saw an opportunity to develop across the road. But yeah, so I think it's, and it also comes back to things very simple, basic retailing, things like service, ease of parking. Do you charge for parking? Don't you charge for parking? Do people feel secure? All of these things, as developers, we have to look after, to say that if we have a competing mall, customers prefer our mall to the opposition.
You you touch on the zoning aspect of development for development purposes. Can you take us through the various steps that are followed in getting an area rezoned for a shopping center development? If this is not too lengthy.
As I say, we don't do a lot of it, David. I don't know if you know.
We don't do it.
You avoid it.
A lot of it. It's not really our no. Most of the shopping centres that we have, we've acquired from somebody else.
Or when we develop, the land is ready or close to ready, because it takes people 3-4 years. And from what we hear, and on a few occasions, especially if two people are competing for sites in a rural area, everybody wants something out of it. And as a listed company, we're not prepared to get involved in that.
Okay. Just to maybe get your comment on what you've just said now, that you never do the initial development or that requires rezoning. You
No.
usually acquire an existing development.
Existing or land, we're happy to develop if the land has already gone through the process of being rezoned or is very close to it's gone through all the steps and there's just a formality. So we'll buy land that's unserviced, but where the approvals for the zonings go through, we'll put in the money to provide the services, the earthworks, everything, and take it from there. But we're not going to go and look and buy a farm and then have to go through the whole process of rezoning.
Sure. On the retail side of your property development, what is Redefine's approach? Is it a long-term approach, short-term approach, medium approach? Do you go into
Long-term.
Long-term. Long-term as in how long, may perhaps?
20, 30. Look, we do sell properties.
Yes.
But we sell properties when they get to a stage where we can't add value or we see it's declining. We're an income fund. So we're not traders of property, we're not developers to sell. So we have shareholders who expect an annual income from the assets. So we look to buy or develop, hold them long term, and continually improve the income and the facility. So we might start with a 25,000 square meter, Chris Harney 35, it's doing well, find a way of adding another 10,000 square meters, there's demand, and just keep adding to and improving.
Okay. So when you say you would sell where development or a property does not add value, what do you mean by a property that does not
So if we find a property, sales are declining, tenants don't want to renew, somebody else has opened a better mall, a competing mall, we don't believe it's worth putting more money into it, we'll sell it to somebody who has a different vision.
Okay. Do you have any views as to who qualify as anchor tenants, and do you have a confined list of who these anchor tenants are or can be, and do you have a list of people that you know are completely disqualified from being anchor tenants in the grocery retail
retail space. So we've got very limited choice.
Yeah.
Okay. So
being limited to
Pick and Pay, ShopRite, Checkers, Woolworths, Spar, Food Lovers Market.
this does not matter where you are, whether it's rural or township. And the reason for that limitation for you?
Because that's who the players are. Okay. Now we've got, but they only in limited area, chappies from Botswana. But generally speaking, we only have a very little, if we're talking grocery anchors, that's who we've got. So, and as I alluded to earlier, if we're going into Dwarsloop or somewhere, Pick and Pay is not going to be the right anchor, nor is Spar. So we kind of limited to whether ShopRite want a Checkers or a ShopRite. If they don't want to come there, we can't develop. That's take it off the list, because Pick and Pay have started going into some of the areas, but I think that their price point for those areas is not correct. So it's not going to be that successful.
Okay. Just to share with us as to what is the trend in terms of from looking at it as a property developer, what is the trend from the grocery retail side is there now more preference for locating themselves in shopping centers, or is there still a balance where you find grocery retailers who would still elect and actually are very happy to operate in standalone premises?
We don't see too many standalone premises from the grocery retailers. It's the exception rather than the rule. That, incidentally, was a very big trend in America, and now they're all moving into malls, partly because the malls need to fill up space and they've lowered the rentals. But you'll get a macro kind of standalone. That's common and that works. But there are very few retailers, grocery or otherwise, that really survive in a standalone.
So amongst the 10, you say there are very few retailers that will survive when they are standalone?
Yeah.
I think the only time you'll find it is if you're in a rural area and you have what we refer to as strip shopping. So it's not a shopping centre, it's almost like it's a street, essentially, a high street in the area. Then you may well find standalone stores.
Can you make an example of a standalone like that that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, street shopping is common. If you take Melville in Johannesburg or Norwood, that's street shopping. So you'd get a retailer, could be any one of the grocery guys who would have a presence in 3 or 4 of those shops for size. It's not an enclosed shopping mall per se, so you're walking down the street, and there are many, many throughout South Africa of those, where you've got your Ackermans, your Pep, your butcher, your baker, and your supermarket and whatever, which is walking down the pavement. So there isn't a mall in the sense of the word that it's enclosed and all the rest of it. So but I don't regard that as standalone. Yes. To me, I think you're saying that somebody goes and builds a freestanding supermarket somewhere. Yes.
So you're saying locally in South Africa, the trend by far is that you find most of these grocery retailers in a shopping center setup.
A shopping center, or in some of the rural areas on, as David described it, strip shopping. Yes. on the street.
Okay. And are there any benefits that as a property developer you understand to be very important for these grocery retailers to locate themselves either in a shopping center specifically, let's say?
Yes, because look, a shopping center provides convenience, or it's supposed to provide convenience. So lots of parking, ease of access, and the spin-off benefit. So people used to think that the grocery retailer brought the foot traffic, which they do, and there would be a spin-off on the other shops. Generally speaking, when people go and buy food, they buy it and they go home because they've got perishables. But by the same token, if they go to buy airtime and they're going into, for example, or a dress, they could then very well go into the shopping centre. So shopping centres have been designed to be a one-stop shop. So in theory, you should be able to go into a reasonable shopping centre and be able to find whatever it is within reason that you're looking for. So you could go and buy some groceries, go and buy a dress for the party you're going to tonight, or earrings, or have your hair done, top up your airtime, buy a bottle of beer or whiskey or whatever it is you want to drink, and you should be able to do it in one place. That's the whole concept of shopping centres, and it's important to have a food retailer, a food anchor, because people generally spend more on food than they do on anything else.
What is Redefined Properties' attitude and approach to exclusive leases in the centres that you own, that you still intend to own, just as a strategy? What is your approach?
We hate them. Okay, to be perfectly frank and honest, we absolutely hate them. In our negotiations with retailers, we will not give an exclusivity clause at all. Okay, we get pressure to give them, we don't. Where we find we have enormous problems is, as David said, we buy a lot of centres, we buy a lot of portfolios. They come with exclusivity clauses. We have exclusivity clauses that go back 25 years?
Yeah.
25 years. And the retailer still insists on keeping it. And when you talk about exclusivity clauses, it comes with a myriad of complications.
Yeah.
So it's not just, I'm the only supermarket.
Yeah.
Okay. It's, you can't have a butcher of more than this size or a bakery of this size. So now you have a bakery of 200 square meters because that's what your exclusivity says. That bakery becomes successful and wants to expand. You can't do it because it's done. Then what is it that grocery, that this this is a grocery store. So you talk about exclusivities. Now, whoever envisaged 25 years ago that grocery stores would sell cell phones, which is a big part of their business. So imagine if we had such a thing as a small cell phone shop and they had an exclusivity. The retailers, the grocery shops, have a usage clause that says they can sell anything that's normally associated with their business. So they can put in cell phones, they can put in this, they can put in that, and they disturb the small tenants. It's anti-competitive. Okay, it's I think it's protectionist. Okay, so it's not allowing. So if you go back 20 years, there was no such thing as Food Lovers Market. Okay, Food Lovers Market is a new entry, and they really battle to get sites. So we had one of the first situations as redefined. Food Lovers wanted to come into one of our centres. The other retailer, Pick n Pay, had an exclusivity, and they said generously when we asked them to relax it, we can have allow a Food Lovers, which is right on the other side of the centre, of I think 400 or 500 square meters. They wanted 3,000. They wouldn't give permission, so we said we're doing it anyway. And we let Food Lovers in, and surprise, surprise, both are doing very well. Pick n Pay's turnover went up, and Food Lovers are doing very, very well. And Pick n Pay threatened to sue us and sue for damages and do all kinds of things. I saw Mr. Jabir just walking out. We didn't refer to it, but and that's what we do because it doesn't make sense. We're in business, okay? We know different to Pick n Pay or Food Lovers selling apples or pears or baked beans or peas. We're selling space, okay? So we're not going to destroy, and our investments run into tens, 20, 100 millions of rands. So we can't go and take a 10 or 15,000 square meter shopping centre that's got a Checkers and put a Pick n Pay in because they both won't survive. Okay, the size of a shopping centre will determine how many food anchors you can have, how many other people you can have. You can imagine, and there are examples of it, where you have some people have built relatively small centres. They have a Checkers, a Pick n Pay, a Checkers, a Woolworths, and a Food Lovers Market in a relatively small centre. None of them do well. So what will happen at the end of the leases? Either all of them are going to get a reduced rent, or one of them is going to move out.
Exit.
So it's a crazy business decision from the start. And then you talk about exclusivities, and the food people will tell you, oh, we have to recoup our investment and we're taking risk. But then you take those examples and you say, excuse me, why have you gone in? And you know from day one, you, Mr. Pick n Pay or Mr. Checkers, you know you're going into a centre of 20,000 square meters with a Woolworths Food, not a whole Woolworths, just Woolworths Food, big one, and a Pick n Pay and a Food Lovers. You knew when you went in. So why is it different when you're going into some other area and you demand exclusivity?
Are you at liberty to give us the name of the mall where you imposed Food Lovers Market on Pick n Pay?
Park Meadows,
Park Meadows.
opposite Bedford View in Bedford View.
Is there, in your view, is there any basis for anchor tenants to be concerned? Because this is what has come out of these public hearings and some of the submissions, written submissions, on not trusting property developers to make the right business decision and a business decision that is aligned to their interests. The interest to, or basically being that to keep the anchor tenant profitable? And they're saying that it has happened. I don't know how frequent this has happened.
It happens, and it happens for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do get an irresponsible or a desperate property owner or developer, usually private guy, and that may happen, okay? But at the same time, we could have the same argument, because what very often happens is your retailer, for whatever reason, is not putting the right merchandise in the store. If it's a grocery anchor, he's not properly merchandised. He's trading very poorly, okay, which affects us. Okay, so we monitor every tenant, every store. We know we work on trading densities. I'm sure you're familiar with what trading densities are, and we can compare in any grocery retailer in a similar centre, and we say, okay, you're doing 20,000 square meters, 20,000 rand per square meter, and suddenly he has a shop that's doing 10 or 12. There's a reason. And particularly when you compare those trading densities to the other tenants, so you're doing something wrong. You're overcharging. You're not giving customer service. I don't know what you're doing, but there's something wrong with your operation, not ours. Property developers, I mean, if you talk about a grocery anchor, so he's going to open a 2,000 or 3,000 square meter store, and he's got a capital investment, I don't know, of 10 million rand or whatever it might be. The property developer's exposure to his mall, okay, is 100 million. So we've got much more to lose than the tenant has in terms if the thing doesn't work. The fact that we've got bricks and mortar, and you can't pick it up and take it out and put the baked beans in your handbag, doesn't mitigate our risk. Okay, our wealth or our investment can be stolen by bad tenants.
There's another aspect, and that is that one is looking to achieve turnover rental. So if you make a mistake like that, then you're not likely to achieve that turnover rental from your supermarket. So it has a negative impact from that perspective.
Just going back on the point you made about looking at the trading densities, can you just speak more on what picture would the trading densities depict, where you have an anchor tenant who's not doing the right thing, and having the right offering? What would you be picking up in terms of? Just speak to her.
You mean in terms of what would happen with surrounding shops?
Yes.
How do we pick it up?
There be more,
How do we pick it up?
Yeah,
Okay.
how do you pick it up from the trade when you analyze your trading densities? How would you pick up the message that actually the problem is with you, Mr. Anchor Tenant?
Typically, we would get the information from the tenant to start with. We would have a benchmark by what a specific tenant should be achieving in terms of trading density, and one would work from that perspective. Then you go into background things that they call heat maps. So you look at a shopping centre plan, and you look to see where the spend is in the centre. And then you can identify the flow of traffic and why they're going in certain places, etc., etc.
Okay. So you look at the footfall to the store and whether
Yep.
it translates into sales.
Correct. And the footfall to the entire centre.
Into the entire center.
Yeah.
And that kind of tells you that there's unhappiness with a specific tenant.
It gives you an indication. And what you may well find is that shops alongside a particular shop that's not doing well, particularly an anchor, would be negatively impacted if that particular anchor is doing poorly.
Or you just find that the management is poor, and you go into the store and you walk around and they sold out of tomato sauce. No tomato sauce on the shelf, or no rice. And that's just poor management. So, and what happens is people go once, people go twice. If they don't get what they want, oh well, there's
Come back again.
Pick and Pay or somebody across the road. Let's go there. They don't come back.
And then
And then they blame the landlord. We always get the blame.
this is interesting. Okay. And so when you pick up the, let's say, poor management of the store, as a landlord and a developer and owner of this property, how do you pick this up? Do you walk into the store and make your own judgment and assessment, or?
Yeah, so look, so we've got managers, we've got shopping centre managers, portfolio managers, all the way up
Who
to
monitor?
me, who monitor. So they'll say, or David will say, why is this tenant not there? And they'll come back and say, it's poor merchandising, it's this, the manager's rude, people come at month end, only 3 of the tills are open instead of 10, all those kind of things. Then we go and we engage with the management or whoever it might be, Shoprite Checkers. We say, look, you see these problems. They promise to attend to it. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. That's one of the big issues, by the way, is how many, particularly at month end, how many till points they open, because they design them, say, with 20, but open 6, and people are standing in lines forever. Then people just abandon their trolleys and go somewhere else.
I just wanted to add, I think the common theme and the point that's coming out is it's in the interest of the owner of the centre for all the tenants to do well. If the anchor's doing well and the surrounding shops, it's in the benefit of everybody. So that's the common theme that's coming out as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chetty. So when you have said your approach and attitude towards exclusivity is that you hate them, and you try and not bind yourselves into any exclusivity. And what has been your experience as Redefine on the performance? I would like you to elaborate this and illustrate it with examples other than the one that you gave us, Park Meadow, on the successes of these properties where you did away with exclusivity. Because we have you saying that, and then we have the shopping, we have the retailers advocating for some of these exclusivities to be retained, because they also feel that removing them will affect the investment they've made in these businesses, the cost that they've incurred they've put in money, huge amounts of money. They're bearing far more cost than any tenant in the shopping center. In fact, they are carrying that tenant, that mall. Without them, there would have never been a mall, for that matter.
Not 100% correct, because as I say, we as the developer take the bigger risk. Secondly, a responsible developer, for want of a better word, is not going to go and add another. We start off, if we start off day one with, let's say we're building a 40 or 50,000 square meter center. Yes. Day one, we'll say there's going to be a Pick and Pay and a Checkers, or Pick and Pay and a Spar on either end of the center, because you don't put them next to each other, you put them apart, and everybody knows, including the retailers when they sign, that they're two. If you now have a 25,000 square meter, let's take Chris Harney, which started off at 35, now it's going to 45. I think we've got one there, I don't know. So we've got one supermarket at 45,000. Maybe it justifies another one. Now, of course, whoever the supermarket is there is going to complain, because they are going to take away some of the business. But there's also performance. Not one of the centres we have now, famous shopping centre in Cape Town, I'm sure you know it, Canal Walk. We were involved, we bought that a few years for Hyprop when I was involved, and there's a Pick and Pay and there is a Checkers. And Checkers outperform Pick and Pay almost 2-1 on the same size shops. So Pick and Pay would complain, well, Checkers customers don't pay for parking, but they had the same 1 hour free, and they had a better location. And it was just poor performance. It was as simple as that. And when they fixed up their performance, their turnovers came in line. Checkers lost a little bit, Pick and Pay gained, but the centre gained. Okay, so nobody's going to go and take away from the guy. And competition is good. When we put Food Lovers into Park Meadows, Mr. Saki was going to sue me and all the rest of it. And he said in first instance, I think the first few months, their turnover did drop a little bit. And then it came back because more people came to the centre. Yeah. It was simple as that. And competition is good. And at the end of the day, we need to create shopping centres that are good for the consumers. Okay? So the more choice we can give the consumers, if you've got 2 supermarkets in a centre of a reasonable size, they'll compete, and the consumer will decide where they're going to shop, or maybe they shop in both because they've both got specials and you buy some stuff here and some stuff there. Our job as the developer and the owner of the shopping centre is to make the experience of the customer the best possible, and that's in terms of comfort, everything that goes with it, and also to have shops in the centre that are competitive.
Yeah. Can I request that in answer to part of my question, it also links up to what you've said. You provide us with a written submission on what has been your experience where you removed exclusivity, and also do indicate where there's been a success for both anchor tenants or whoever you allowed into the center, and where actually your decision was actually wrong, and then we just want to get a sense of that, and of how often you are correct and how often these decisions are wrong.
What trading densities for Pick and Pay.
Yeah, that's your easiest way of picking it up, is just to continuously look at the trading densities for each of the stores.
But what happens as well, just to come back to what the grocery retailers say, and I don't know if these, but we go to a particular retailer and say, will you remove your exclusivity? We don't get an argument in terms of, we're not giving it up. But then it's, what's in it for me? Okay, so you give us a lower rent somewhere else, or you give us a tenant installation, or you do this or the other, and then we prepare to release it. So all they're doing is taking an exclusivity, which they claim, okay, and I say claim in inverted commas, we need, but if we go and ask them, and we have had those.
Yeah, we have had them.
And we've had those where they say, okay, we'll take it away, but we're not giving it up for nothing. Okay, so now it becomes for them an asset which they're trading with their landlord.
Okay. So they use it to get something else out of the
Yeah, so they'll say, okay, we'll give it up, but you give us 2 million rand to fix up this, and give us 1 million rand, or give us a lower rent in your new development or something, and then they'll give it up. So you can't sit and tell me, okay, they can't, that we need exclusivities to stop somebody else trading when they're prepared to sell that right.
And that's becoming quite commonplace.
Can we request that you give us, if you're comfortable with providing us with a list of all those instances where you approach the anchor tenant to waive their
And they ask for
exclusivity,
money.
and then they ask for something else in return,
Sure.
whether
Yep.
money or something else.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we can give you that.
If you can exhaust it, please do exhaust it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
I just have a few on rental. Sorry, we've come to understand that there are different components to rent. If you can take
Sorry, I
us-
can't.
Yeah, we've come to understand that there are different components or different types of rental. Can you take us through?
Different.
Yeah.
Well, there's essentially base rental and turnover rental. There's two types of rental. So you start off by saying to a tenant, and it's not just your grocery retailers, it's generally across the board, that we will give you a rental of 90 Rand a square meter, or 2% of turnover, whichever is the higher. So once the tenant reaches a threshold, you participate in their growth, which is another reason why, a developer wouldn't just willy-nilly put another competing tenant in, because you're going to take turnover away, and you won't either you won't achieve that threshold, or you're going to take it away. And that applies to clothing retailers, all kinds of people. It's also interesting, just when you come to exclusivities, if you think about it, the grocery retailers want exclusivities, but your fashion retailers, Truworths, Fashini, Mr. Price, won't come into a centre unless their competitors are there.
Sorry, what type of competitors do they want? If it's Woolworths, would they want Foschini and Edgar's, or would they want a small, say, Levi's or shop?
No, they want their major competitors, the other major retailers, and the more the merrier, because they've worked out over the years, If you go and you want to buy a blue shirt and they haven't got it, you'll go somewhere else and buy it, but next time you'll buy from them. So they want people to have comparative shopping, whereas the grocery retailers want monopolies.
Okay, so if we go back to the rental, is if I come into your malls or center, is that all I'd be expected to pay?
No. So that's rental, okay? So we say, okay, you're taking 100 square meters at 100 rand a meter, that's your rental. If you do well, we want some turnover. In addition, depending on the kind of center, you're responsible for electricity rates, water, all the municipal charges, any increases in rates and taxes. And then if it's a big center and they have a merchants association that promotes the center, then there's a contribution towards that, and the landlord also contributes towards that. That's to put on the promotions, Father's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas, all those kind of things.
And then in addition to that, there would be a contribution towards operating costs. So you're cleaning your security costs.
So would that, what was it called? Would that be the common area
Yes.
cost?
Yeah.
We were trying to make sense of it yesterday, my colleagues and I. How are those calculated? I mean, if I'm operating a store that side and she's operating the rest of the team.
It's generally done on that basis. It's a prorated basis. So if you occupied 5% of the center, typically you would pay 5% of those costs.
And it's not in any way linked to the amount of rentals I'm paying.
No. So if you go back, there were two ways of doing rentals. If we go back, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, we used to have what we called a gross rental. So if we said to you today your rental was 100 Rand, we would have included operating costs and said your rental's 120. But inflation might have been 10% or 15%, and operating costs either growing at a lower or higher percentage of that. So it was separated. So we said, this is your rental, this is your operating costs, common area costs, but common area costs go up not usually by way of an escalation, by way of actual. So if security guards and cleaners get a big wage increase, it would go up more. If we contain those costs, it would go up less. And it's exactly proportionate to how much space you operate. So if you were paying 100 Rand a meter and your neighbor was paying 200 Rand a meter by way of example, and you both had the same size stores, you would both pay the same operating costs.
Okay, just on that, as a follow-up, then we've heard that the larger retailers pay an X amount of rental, say rents per square meter, and the smaller stores generally pay double to triple that amount.
Depends on where in the center, but clearly if somebody takes 2,000 or 3,000 square meters and somebody takes 100 square meters, it's going to be different. It's a bulk sale. There's more certainty. So if you went, again, we come back to your shirt. So if you went into a manufacturer and wanted to buy one shirt, you're going to get one price. Go and ask him for 250 shirts, you're going to get a different price. And the same applies to space. So, and of course then, so first of all, there's the size of the space. So the more space you take, whether you a grocery retailer or anybody else, the more space you take, the better rental you're going to get, relatively speaking. When you come down to somebody who's got the cigarette shop of 20 square meters, he's going to pay 4 times the rent or whatever it is. The second thing that relates to that is the security of the income. So listed companies, blue chip companies, your rent is, if they sign a 10-year lease, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to collect your rent for 10 years. Okay? From the guy who's making pies and selling them you're not that sure. His credit risk is higher, and that's factored into your rent.
But position within the centre also plays a big role. So you could have two shops of the same size, different areas, paying different rental rates.
Would okay, now I need your help. Would it not be self-defeating? I mean, if I'm paying the same, if I'm paying, you know, say we use 90 rand. If I'm paying 90 rand a square meter and Pick n Pay is paying 90 rand a square meter, and I know for a fact that in the mall down the road I'll be paying 270 a square meter, am I not likely to stay in your store, in your mall, and make more money and the security?
You are, but if I was charging Pick n Pay 90 rand a square meter and you 90 rand a square meter, I would be out of business. The bank would have taken away my property because I couldn't pay my mortgage, and it wouldn't be viable. You could never make them all work on that basis. You have to remember what happens if somebody is developing a mall today. Okay, they're going to, from scratch, they're going to have a plan. They're going to pre-let it. They're going to go to Nedbank or FNB, whoever, and say, okay, I've got a mall. Here's my cost. Here's the architect's plans. Here's the surveyor. It's going to cost me 100 million rand. And based on my pre-lettings and my estimates, I'm going to get 8 million rand a year, or 8.5 million rand a year of income, because that's the best they're going to do, 8 to 8.5. The bank's going to look at it and say, okay, we'll give you 60 or 65 million rand against this, but the interest rate is 10 or 10.5%, which means for the first 2 or 3 years, that developer is getting no return on his 30 or 35 million rand because the bank's charging him 2.5% more than what his return is. So if he comes and says, okay, I'm getting 90 rand from everybody, he'll never get his scheme off the ground because he'll never get the return. You have to remember that aside from exclusivity clauses, the retailers, if we come back to your anchor tenants, they know up front that on this size store, this is more or less the turnover we can do. And I used 90 rand a meter because we know 90 to 110 rand a meter is the most you're going to get from a grocery anchor, is that right? 90 to 110 rand, depending. That's what you can get from a grocery retailer. If you went to them and said, I want 140 or 150 rand, they'll say, sorry, my business is not viable because their margins, don't forget, every tenant works on a different margin. So grocery tenants work on a very small margin. And if you're a jeweler and you're selling diamonds, you only have to sell one every 3 or 4 days, and you're doing very nicely because you're making, for every 100 rand, maybe another 100. The grocery retailer is making 3 rand on 100 or whatever the number is. So it's not just about size and turnover and rental. What is your business? What are your margins? Everybody has a different margin. So clearly, a tenant who has large space and low margins, it has to pay a lower rental than somebody who takes small space selling jewelry, for example, or watches where the markup is big.
Am I right then to assume from what you are saying, a bakery from Fosloras who has been there trading, say 10 meters away from the mall, he could never afford to be in the mall?
No, that's not true at all. That depends on, let's say he's trading 10 or 20 meters away from the mall. He's in a little shop somewhere, he's not paying a high rental, but he doesn't have a very high foot traffic. So by him going into the mall, okay, if he's doing 1,000 rand a month turnover, he might be doing 8 or 10,000 by being in the mall, more foot traffic, if his product is right. And I'm sure many, the problem we have in South Africa with malls, and you've been to malls, is everyone is the same. Okay, you've got Edgar's, you've got Mr. Price, you've got Checkers, or you've got Pick n Pay. You go in, there's very little that makes Mall A and Mall B different. What makes it different, okay, and the difference you look for are the small tenants, the baker you're talking about. So you want to encourage that guy, if he's good, to come and be in your mall, because that's the point of difference, okay? So if you have a look, and I'm not using this as an example, but if you look at Melrose Arch, now they put in a baker, Paul's. You can't get into the place because it's different. How long will that last? And I'm not saying the guy in Vosloo's is Paul's, but if there's somebody who's doing something well and good, no matter how well and good he's doing stuck away somewhere, he'll do better in the mall. And if he's got a reasonable landlord, they'll try and accommodate him, because that's what we look for continually, are tenants who can make a difference, because otherwise it makes no difference. There's nothing to tell you to go to my mall at Centurion or the one down the road, because we've got the same tenants, and the tenants are selling the same stuff.
Talking about making a difference, Mr. Wayner, there's been a complaint that has come through to this inquiry with regards to the presence of shopping centers in the townships, in the rural areas. If you've been following the submissions, both written as well as those who appeared before in these public hearings. Basically, the complaint is that when the malls came into the townships and rural areas, they came in and had a very negative impact on retailers around the area, on the small and independent retailers located around the mall, and these people were driven out of the market. Basically, you would have, I mean, as you would know, I'm sure you operate in these areas. You probably have a fair understanding of how they operate. Most people wouldn't be operating in this, wouldn't have a home here, and then open a shop 20 kilometers away from where they are. Their business would be somewhere in the vicinity of where they live, and therefore, when they're driven out of the market, they actually find no way back to actually sell what they were selling. And as a result of this, there's been a proposal to us as an inquiry to try and see if to try and persuade both the retailers to do something about this situation, because I'll speak to the developers, and I won't tell you what the impact is by retailers. That the malls or the shopping centers try and accommodate some of the players that are coming from the community, who are conscious of the fact that they cannot afford the types of rentals that you charge, and shouldn't there be some percentage allocated to these entrepreneurs in the area, just to keep that market going and growing? And to what extent is Redefined doing this, if you are doing it?
So let me first say I understand this 100%. My background is my parents had a little grocery shop in Yeovil, equivalent, slightly bigger than a spaza shop.
Yeah.
And we did very nicely. We lived reasonably. Early 60s came the advent of self-service. OK Bazaars was the dominant one. Suddenly we had this proliferation of because those days it was a little grocery shop. People telephoned, they gave the order, you wrote it down, you picked it, you put it on a bicycle, and you delivered it. Now you do exactly the same thing on the internet, but we've gone back. But so this is what happened. So then we had OK Bazaars. We then had Checkers coming in, and we've got this tiny little grocery store, and I worked there. Okay, I worked in this business. So what happened is all the little retailers got together, and that's how SPAR got formed. SPAR was a buying association where the wholesalers who were supplying us said, okay, your business is threatened. We've got to see that you can buy better so you can compete on price. And that's how SPAR, so we became a SPAR shop. So I do understand what these people go through, but at the same time, competition means you've got to sharpen your game. Yes. We sat, and I say this honestly, and we were fat cats because we were supplying a service. We didn't have, my customers weren't going to OK Bazaars in those days, they weren't so big. Suddenly, I was selling, I still remember the prices, Frisco coffee for 99 cents a tin, and you could buy it at OK Bazaars for 79, and so you went. So we had to find a way to compete. Okay. In the townships, I think that there are some fantastic entrepreneurs, and I'm meeting a lot of them in another initiative that I'm doing. But you sit there complacent, okay, with no competition, okay, and quite honestly rip people off because that's what you've got. And I also know that there's this big complaint that some of the foreign nationals, the Ethiopians, are much more efficient. They're selling stuff cheaper because they're more efficient. I don't know if they're more efficient, they've got a buying thing, they're buying stolen goods, I don't know what it is, but they're more efficient. These people have got to get more efficient. In our malls, we incorporate hawker stores, okay? We've got place for hawkers to come in. We are happy to find if there's a tenant or somebody who's got something unique, I'm doing something different, we'll, as Rita found, I can't talk for, we'll give that person a break. We need those people.
Yeah.
We need people to make a difference. So if somebody can come in, and that's the other thing about exclusivities that I can just come back to. The world is moving so fast. We don't know what's going to be sold in 5 years' time. And exclusivities, I want to give you one example of how people can get caught, because I've been in this business a long time. When Eastgate opened, Liberty, not me, there was a shop that sold luggage, Diplomat, they're still around. And the exclusivity said, we've got an exclusivity on leather goods. Okay. Then they let us shop because Bedford View in those days, people rode horses. So they rent a little shop to a guy who sold saddles for horses. They were now in contravention of the exclusivity, and for every saddle that guy sold, Liberty had to pay Diplomat the difference, the profit. Now, you don't think as a landlord, as I say, cell phones, who knows what's coming next, and we can be in contravention of an exclusivity because we never ever thought of it. Who ever thought that Game was going to want to sell groceries?
Yeah.
But they did. I mean, Game always sold potato chips and sweets and chocolate. So where's the line? I don't know. But and these are issues for us because we now have, for example, in centres, Game have said, okay, if you don't break this exclusivity, we're not going to renew our lease.
Yeah.
Okay. If Game doesn't renew the lease on that side of the centre, that impacts the small tenants around them because we're going to have a 2,000 or 3,000 square metre empty shop. Okay, so nobody's going to that side of the centre, but we've got tenants with leases outside Game store. Okay, small tenants. And if nobody's going down that side as the draw, those tenants will go bust.
Okay. So on my question, you're saying you are already doing this.
We do this, okay, we
defined.
are looking for people, okay, we're encouraging people who've got something different,
Yes.
okay. We need to, because foot traffic is not growing, we've got too many shopping centres as it is, so we need a reason for people to come to our centre, okay, whether they're the best hairdresser in the area, whether they're making fantastic fit cook or whatever it might be. We need somebody who says, I'm going there because I like their donuts, or that's me, but whatever it is.
So just to add to that, so we do it, and in fact, as a matter of course, wherever we can, we will put hawker stalls, which are lock-up, at a much cheaper price, even at the entrance to large shopping centres.
Okay. We will take note of that. And then just as a last point from me, we had in the questions we sent to you a question on a broad range of things that we thought financiers, such as banks, may impact on this area, the grocery retail, property developers, and that having a bearing on grocery retail. Are there things that you want to point out that you think, for example, do they influence who becomes an anchor tenant? Do their decisions have a bearing on this, on the tenant mix at all?
Okay, so let me start off telling you what my late grandmother used to say about bankers. She said they were crooks in suits. So what we have with bankers, okay, is they will fund a shopping centre. You like that? I like it. So we have the bankers who have a look at a shopping centre being developed or existing. They look at the cash flow and they say, okay, we value this at 100 million and we'll give you 60 or 65 million. But in addition to that, they have a loan to value ratio cover. So that shopping centre gets valued every year. If you get vacancies or your shopping centre is not performing, your value drops, let's say, from 100 million to 85 million. The bank then says, hang on, 60% of 80 or 85 million is now 55 million, pay in. So you've got to remedy that. If you don't remedy, and that's irrespective of the fact that your rental might still be sufficient to cover the bond payment, to service the interest. So the bank will then come and use that as a lever and say, okay, you're in breach. But sorry, but I'm still paying my interest. Yes, but you're in breach. So your interest rate now, because it's a higher risk, is not 10%, it's 11 or 11.5. So the one thing I've learned in life, banks don't lose. Okay, they just cover themselves. Don't laugh, it's true. They cover themselves, they're conservative. They generally don't influence the tenant mix, but they have to be satisfied with it, particularly in a new development. So if you went to them with a new development and you didn't have a grocery anchor, they wouldn't fund it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wena, and thank
Pleasure.
you, Mr. Rice, and thanks, Ms. Chetty. We will take note of this, and then please do take note of the questions that we asked you to follow up on in writing, yes. And should you have anything else that you want to add to, and should we have further questions that arise out of this, because we still have, we've got Masingita that's coming in now, and then we've got two other players on Monday, and there'll be more submissions that will probably arise out of these public hearings. Should there be questions, further questions that
Happy to answer.
we would like you to answer those.
Just in closing, what I would like to say is that we have tough times in South Africa, all South Africans. We need to create opportunities for as many people as possible. Okay, it's very, very difficult. It's hard enough for people out there to start a business, to get sufficient capital, and then to find that we have restrictions, okay, through exclusivities. Just makes it much more difficult. I can't think of many areas or anything where an exclusivity is warranted, but I think it should work in reverse. So if there was a compelling reason for one of the grocery retailers who are going to some area and they say, listen, we really need, in order to come into this area, we need an exclusivity. They should have to come to Comcom to get permission for it, not the other way around, and us try and get it removed. We've had many instances in acquisitions that we've made where the commissioner has asked us, okay, we're giving you permission to acquire this portfolio, but use your best endeavors to get an exclusivity clause removed. I don't think we've had one success, have we? No. We haven't had one success. So it should be the other way around. If they really and truly believe that they're investing money, then let them come and say, I need an exclusivity in this area, because generally speaking, there's competition all around. So, and if it's in an area where there's nothing, well then justify it. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you very much, Mr. I think the other questions that we may follow up on, Vani, would be questions on market definition and the various effects that different sizes of malls and types of malls have on each other. That's possibly something that we might follow up on you on.
Would you need that in writing or by?
In writing, yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
And you too, sir. We're just going to take a 5-minute adjournment to allow chair the hearings on his behalf. I'm assisted by the two colleagues who work for the Competition Commission, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Sunal Grimbeek. I'm a principal economist at the Competition Commission, and I'm leading the technical team that's working on the retail inquiry.
Good afternoon. My name is Thabo Khumalo. I'm a senior legal counsel working at the Competition Commission and with the Grocery Retail Market Inquiry.
Okay. I will then ask the delegation from Masingita Properties to introduce themselves, especially those people who will be participating in the discussion or answering questions or any clarification questions that we may have. And that we also, because we had sent out questions, other parties had kind of had presentations that they wanted to make or introductory remarks that they wanted to make. So can we get also, after you've introduced yourselves, get an indication from you as to how you wish to proceed? Do you want us to ask questions, or do you have a presentation that you'd like to make to us? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name, I'm Mike Nkuna, the Chair and the founder of Masingita Properties.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Timothy Piri, the CEO of Masingita Properties.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Marcelo Mena. I'm the Development Manager for Masingita Properties.
Sorry, sir, can you repeat your name?
Marcelo Meno.
Okay, Marcelo.
Yes, Meno.
Menno.
Correct.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Johan Engelbrecht. My responsibility is asset management for the portfolio.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Edward Voutberg, and I'm the leasing manager for Masingita Properties.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. This is Joyce Namford. I act for Masingita.
Sorry, ma'am, will you, we missed that.
Joyce Namford.
Okay, Joyce.
Yes.
Okay, and the surname?
Nam, N-A-M, hyphen Ford.
Namford.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Thank you.
I've got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Nguna, I don't know if you, who's the main speaker? We just want to get an understanding as to how you intend to proceed. We're not sure if you would like us to ask questions or you have a presentation that you'd like to make, as I've indicated earlier.
Thanks very much, Chair. Let me outline how we're going to proceed as a delegation from Masingita. We've got some presentation which we're going to hand it over to you so that you can understand as we talk to you, because you see you have already given us questions to answer.
Yes.
So we have prepared a detailed a response on the questions and answers.
Yes.
Right? We propose to answer questions from the panel after the presentation. So in other words, we'll go on and do the presentation, and once we finish, and then you can then start asking questions.
That is in order, Mr.
We also condense the main theme that emerged in those answering into the presentation.
Sure.
We propose to make I've alluded to that, and we have already introduced ourselves. So what I'll do, I'll hand over, the presentation so that, as they do the presentation, you can follow us. So before, I hand over to the persons that are going to, move with the presentation with us. Firstly, I think it's important for myself to give an overview about myself so that, you can understand, because you see, some of the questions that you might, need to answer, they might be contained on my, overview.
Mr. Nkuna, can I ask that as you introduce yourself, who you are, in that context, give also some background on Masingita as well?
Definitely. Definitely, I'm going to do that. I'll give a background about myself and a background about Masingita. All right. Thanks for inviting us to this commission so that, we can share the understanding of this, environment with you. As I've indicated that I'm Mike Nkuna, coming from, the rural area of Malamulele. That's where I was born and moved to Johannesburg, whereby, all of us, as black people, will be residing from the rural areas and immigrate to Johannesburg to seek for gold. And that's what happened. In my case, I was a bit fortunate on the basis that, my father was already working in Johannesburg. At that time, the township, particularly Soweto, as you know, we had, the Soweto Council. And the Soweto Council, they were the ones that, were giving, housing and obviously, businesses as well. So in those days, the development of business was going to vest with, the Soweto Council, whereby, my father was, allocated, a small butchery. And I would, remember when he started, because it was more of a corner shop, which was in Shawela. And as he was running that, butchery, the turnover that, he was doing, per day would be between 500 and 1,000. To a point whereby, he realized that, he's not making money. And then he came to me and asked me whether, I'll be prepared to run, that kind of, butchery. And indeed, I went there and, test myself whether, I was a true entrepreneur. And indeed, when I took, the management of that butchery, I was able to turn it around to a point that, from the 500 that he was doing in a form of turnover, I then, take it to about 5,000 to 10,000 a day. So that, it will demonstrate that, if, you are a born entrepreneur and you've got a vision to be somewhere else, you'll grow to that height. So what happened is that, as we know, that, black people in those olden days were not, allowed to own houses up until after, the 76 uprising. Only then, the then government decided, to give black people, the bonded houses, particularly for those who were working for government so that they can get subsidy. So what happened is that, in the 1978-79, when the government decided to give, the bonded houses to blacks, and they didn't allow blacks to be the developers. The development of those houses, it was given to the big, construction company, the Maran Robbers, the Greenicers. So myself, I saw an opportunity whereby, I started mobilizing people and take, a subcontract, in those companies who were, that were doing development in black areas. And that's when, I realized that, I wanted to be a property developer. And meanwhile, I was running, my father's butchery. And in 1980, I had an opportunity to buy a land in Soweto, whereby, when I saw that land, I felt that, I need to do some development. And the development that I wanted to do, it was a garage and a small convenience supermarket, because I had realized that, operating, a butchery in a corner shop, it was not bringing enough customer. I wanted to develop a shopping center, a small shopping center, which, people will then come and buy petrol and buy other things, and which was going to bring more customers. So that's where, I realized that, to put up, a shopping center, it will be a better idea. And indeed, after I bought that stand, I was approached by BP because BP wanted to buy that site from me. I then said, guys, I'm not interested in selling the site. I'm interested in developing. At that time, the so-called, Pick and Pay and ShopRite, they were not there. In those days, the big supermarket, it was Score and OK Bazaars. And Score Supermarket approached me to say, can we become a tenant? And I then said yes. And I was fortunate that, I approached, the bank that was then, the Permanent Building Society, to come in as a tenant. They agreed. And I was able to package, the whole, study in order to develop that convenience center. And after I've realized, 60% of, the national tenants, I approached, the very same Permanent Bank Building Society, whereby, to apply for a loan in order to develop that shopping center. Somehow, my loan was rejected. And I didn't take no as an answer. I had to approach, the power that might be and try and understand what is the criteria they use in awarding and rejecting. So they tried and explained to me to say, when, we invest, money or give you loan, we investing money that belongs to the investors. Therefore, we have to make sure that, there will be a return on the investment. And secondly, and so far as, development is concerned, we are looking at, the ratio of 60% national tenant, and then we award it along those bases. And I then said, look, in this instance, you're discriminating me because I've achieved 80%. And the powers that might be, they realize that they've made a mistake, they gave me loan. That was the beginning of my journey. So if you look at, Masingita, over the 30-year period, we have developed more than 16 shopping centers in rural areas and township.
My apologies, Mr. Nguna. Can I interrupt you there? What year did you buy the land? 1980?
1980.
How were you able to own land? Because a number of submissions we've received here was that in those years, black people could not own land. So how were you able to
as
own
I've
land?
As I've indicated when I started, I've indicated to you that, blacks were not, allowed to own, property, no houses.
Except for those who worked for government.
Except, what happened is, you see, before 1976, blacks were not allowed completely to own a house or land. But you see, after 1976, and then they've established, the Soweto City Council. You'll recall that, that Soweto City Council, the late, Mr. Chabalala, because when I came to Soweto, the two prominent names, it was Maponya and Chabalala. And myself, because I was a visionary, when I arrived in Soweto, somehow, I felt, that, I have to make an impact as an individual. Because you see, to become a businessman or to become a developer, it must come from you. You have to feel it and say, I want to make a difference. Because you see, if you want, to be fed, nothing will come to you. So you have to have a vision and say, this is how I'm going to execute my vision. So after 1976, after the uprising, the then government realized that, they were in trouble. Then they established that, we've got to create land so that, blacks can start owning houses, and those who have got vision, they can start with the development of whatever, they want to do. So I managed to buy my first land in 1980. And the first development, which was more organized, because Maponya had, a corner shop in Dube. Shabalala had, in AA2, and the corner shop in Mufulo, and White City, Jabaf. Those who know Soweto, you'll know. So myself, I wanted to come in and add number. I hope I've answered your question.
You have, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, as I've indicated that, my journey started from that one, and I then said to myself, I need to pride myself and focus on the areas that, no one else has focused on those areas. Because you see, if you look at, the demographic of our country, when South Africa, I'll go back to history. I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman. I'll go back to history. When, the British colonized us, right? And later on, the Afrikaner came to us to help them to fight the British to take the country. And after, we have helped, the Afrikaner to take the country, they then start, in developing, South Africa. And if you look how, they've developed South Africa, they created, the urban area and the rural area and the township. So if you look at, the development of, the urban area was designed that, in the township and rural area, there mustn't be any development. So that, blacks can commute, move into the, come to the urban area and work later on and commute back. So whatever, they earn, they'll spend it on transport, and they'll spend it on transport going backwards. So you find that, even if, they want to buy grocery, it was not going to be easy to buy grocery within their doorsteps, or to see their doorsteps being up, also developed or uplift, so that, it can also become urban area. So when I started, I then felt that, myself, I need to make a mark and focus mainly in the township, right? And prove that, given a chance, we can do it. And my primary goal, it was to focus in Soweto and, rural areas. So if you look at, the shopping center that, I've developed, they are mainly in township and, rural area. And I'll call myself insofar as saying that, I wanted to be a champion and a pioneer in developing in, township. And by developing in, a township, I felt that, I'll be uplifting the lifestyle of our black people and also create jobs and create competition. Because you see, if you don't have competition, you won't be able to grow. Because if you create competition for yourself and set up goals and say, I want to reach there, then you'll achieve it. So that's what, I did to myself. And I've achieved that with distinction because in today's market, you can go to any corner of this country. You ask about Masingita, they'll tell you about Masingita. And yes, there are challenges. You'll hear as we present. You find that as you grow and you want to borrow money, there are conditions that comes with it, and you have to decide whether you take it or not. Things like exclusive clauses, you'll find that at some stage because you see I was a beginner. When they say, they'll put this clause, you say, I want to go there. I had to sign. But you see, what makes me happy, in some of the leases that I've signed, now that, I'm highly experienced, I'm highly respected in this field, when I go back to them and say, going forward, I might not put you into my centers. Remove this clause. They are removing it because they respect the knowledge that I have. Knowledge is power. So going forward, let me allow, so that, we do the presentation, and once we finish with the presentation, we'll be able to, respond to your question. And the other thing that, I've noticed as I was looking at, the list of the participants that were invited here, I realized that, I was the only proper developer. Because you see, the people that were here, including the one that left here, they are property fund managers. They are listed company. They are not in our category because you see, they don't go to the banks. They use their own money. For instance, some of us, because of knowledge and the experience that I have, a company like Redefine, they also assisted me and financed me in one of the development which they wanted to partner with me. And if I didn't have that experience, they wouldn't have done that. So some of the things you'll hear. What I'll do now, I'll hand it over to Marcelo to go in with the slide. And then once we finish, and then we'll open up for questions.
Just a short question from me. We understand that there are players in the property space who manage, who will be property managers, and then there are those who develop.
Are listed.
Yes. And then there are those who will be developing. So you are saying, do you do any property management at all, or do you just focus on development, and then someone else manages your properties?
Fortunately, you must have heard, as they were, introducing themselves, because you see, my property portfolio has grown to a point whereby, like when I started, I was operating from the boot of my car, and now, if you have a sizable portfolio, you can no longer operate from the boot of a car. And now I've got, an asset manager in Johan. He runs that division. Sure. So because of experience, I'm now also privileged. I'm also privileged like those ones because you see, when I grew up, I said, how possible these guys can achieve this? So I set up some goals and say, I want to achieve what they've achieved. And I want to prove a point. And I didn't tell you the other story. When I arrived in Johannesburg, coming from the rural area, I admired, Carlton Center. And I said to myself, wow, how did they do it? I said, one day I'm going to do it. I can tell you sitting here that, today I'm the first black to have developed, a high-rise building in the center of the economy of this country. It's because I said, I'm going to learn. I'm going to do it. So if you look what's happening in our country, it saddened me because people, in terms of talking about, serious business, talking about tender. How are you going to learn?
Which property is that in Sandton?
It's a residential development. Okay. Masingita Towers.
Okay.
Madam Chair, excuse me, being an asset management structure and a property management structure, I just want to clarify that. Yeah. The ownership of the properties are holding in a company which I directly do the asset management of. And the asset management has an outsource, so I outsource that to third parties to do the physical property management. So the structure starts with a property manager, which reports to me as an asset manager, and I report to the shareholders.
Okay. So Masingita does not do any
property management. To clarify, we don't do any property management.
You may proceed, sir.
Come again?
Thank you,
I was
Madam.
saying you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the key factors that influence development is location. Based on that, we'd have a look at accessibility of the location, the visibility of the location, the catchment, the flow of the catchment, and then finally our chairman's final sign-off. We'd take him to the site, he'd have a look at it and get a feel for the ground and positioning of where it is and what sort of community we'd serve and how. The key factors, once we've identified the location that we'd look at, would be, first of all, would be the availability and identifying the location of where we believed the centre would be best suitable. Thereafter, we would then arrange for a demographic study, a specialist study, a demographic study, which would be conducted by a professional firm, either Fernreach or Democon, etc. From this, Masingita would look at a few aspects which would come in the report, which would be concluded in the demographic, which one would be the commercial and residential growth in primary and secondary catchments. Now, the primary catchment would be within a certain radius, and a secondary would be in a certain radius. This would differ in an urban area going to a rural area. Rural areas would have a bigger catchment, where urban area would be more concentrated in a smaller catchment radius. Masingita would then inquire about the availability of land, whether it would be owned by council or it would be owned by individuals, and would look at the acquisition and how we'd go by the acquisition of the land. We'd also further take into account existing retail outlets within the area, surrounding area, and traders within the area. We'd obviously engage with them and understand what are the needs of the community, etc., on our own basis. Upon there, we'd consider commercial viability, of which we would have plans drawn up of what we believe we could place on the site, together with an architect professional team in doing a feasibility and costing and so forth, and seeing what sort of a return we would get. Based on that, we would then be able to see if the land could be secured. Once the land would be secured, we then discuss with the local authorities in terms of rights and achieving, etc., and then put it out to the market, whereby we'd look at all the tenants. And when I specify tenants, meaning more national tenants, we'd go to the national tenants and understand what sort of tenant-driven demand our location and centre would have. This would be also a very important factor that would govern where we would put the centre. Based on all of this, this demographic and professionals, etc., would then tell us what sort of size of a centre, because it would give you a conclusive result. It will tell you how many households are within the area, what sort of income expenditure you could expect within the area, and it would then base it down to a total expenditure within your primary catchment for the area. Of that, we would generally only take a 14 to 20% factor, and say of the total expenditure of the area, between the 14 and the 20%, this would then account for a shopping centre of a certain size. With that given and said, what would happen then is it would tell you percentages of grosser. Normally, our average household expenditure would be 30 to 40% in terms of grosser, and the balance would be split across the various categories. Once we have this in place and that the outcome is within the design and role, we would then go back to the tenants, of which they would themselves, especially our anchors and fashion retails, would then arrange their own demographic studies to confirm the numbers. Thank you very much.
I just want to understand why 20 to 40% of the catchment area of that market?
Predominantly, it's 14 to 20%, predominantly because of
14 to 20.
14 to 20%. Predominantly, one is that there is a lot of leakage within the area, so you don't get all of the catchment. A lot of people prefer other destinations and are loyal to other stores. And other than that, I think that would be it.
Before I hand over to, Edward, I just want to correct something. Sometimes you see, I was just focusing, on this of property development. In line with your question, insofar as is Masingita doing the management of their own property or not, Johan answered it, correctly. But subsequently to that, we have just, formalized a relationship with Aries Property on the basis of that, Masingita own 51% and they own 49% on the property management and facilities management and property advisory, because you see, I've realized that most of our black people they would want to enter into this space, and they would want to deal with somebody who understands it. So I then said it would be bad for me to die with this kind of knowledge without passing this knowledge to other people that can learn from me.
And then just to go back to your thank you, Mr. Nkona. Just to go back to what you said on identifying the catchment area. How do you determine a catchment area, and does this differ in a rural setting and in a township and urban setting? Or what considerations would you take into account, of factors that would make it different, make this catchment area different in those areas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I alluded, it would be the needs of the area. So we would look at the population and current demand. Your primary catchment or retail demand would be a great factor in population. So we'd look at households that would be an unserviced households in terms of needs, etc., like specific areas like we discussed, Malamalela or Zibedelia. Zibedelia on its own is a small township which only has hawking trading and had no retail or other stores. And the nearest place for it to go and shop would be 30 to 40 kilometers. So this would be a primary focus for us. We'd look at it and then do the demographic to understand what sort of average household income we'd have, what sort of population does it have, and what sort of demand would a retail centre in that area cater for.
To add on what he has just answered, he has given an example about Zebediel. In most cases, when it comes to identifying sites, I'm more experienced. I'm giving them a guideline, because when you approach an area, you look at the surroundings. Take Zebediel. It's a village which is situated in a very central area and surrounded by about 48 villages. And you then look at a good spot where the traffic flows, It's like a river. You look at, how where the water flows. So similarly, the flow of people will pass there towards, a shopping center which will be in Lebuahomu, which is about, 30 kilometers. So what we're doing, we're saying that, if we then put it here, we'll shorten their distance. That's how we identify sites.
And then in assessing the income levels in the areas that you in that catchment area, how would you do that exercise? How would you conduct that exercise?
Well, fortunately, in today's, it's a very good question, right? Fortunately, I'll answer it, broadly, because you see, I've dealt with, that kind of question when, I was trying to convince a ShopRite, and when I was trying to convince Nedbank to finance me, right? I've said to them, firstly, what we'll have to do, we'll have to get statistics in terms of the people that are working within. In that instance, you'll be looking at, government servants, and then you'll then look at other employment like farming within the area, and then bearing in mind that, history in terms of us as blacks, when, we go to Joburg to seek for employment, or when we go to Polokwane to seek for employment, we go and work there, but you see, we don't, spend our money in Johannesburg. We spend our money back home. So you have to take a factor of that in justifying the viability of putting that. And it has proven, because guys like, ShopRite, and I still believe that, they own me some intellectual property. Because, you see, Christopher managed to go and do, the money transfer, because, you see, they were probing from me. The money transfer that is happening, it happened because of me. So that's how you justify the income.
Thank you, Mr. Nkuna. Afternoon, everyone. Part of the presentation was to...
Sorry, just for a second. You mentioned that did ShopRite also fund you, or was it Nedbank that was doing the funding?
Nedbank was funding me for the development, and then ShopRite, I was communicating to them to come in as a tenant.
As an anchor tenant?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you and good afternoon. Part of our presentation was to discuss why shopping centers or malls instead of standalone stores. So just to substantiate that, we found that it was convenient to the consumer to have more than one type of offering available in one place. It saves the consumer time, effort and money by allowing them to visit one venue for all their needs and services. The opportunities to trade increase by having everyone together and deciding that people will come to one venue as opposed to being sporadic and going to standalone stores. Safety is also a consideration when we develop shopping centers. People find that by coming to a shopping center, it's a safe environment to shop, to spend their time and money. Retailers operating in standalone stores also don't benefit from the branding power of a shopping center. A shopping center is advertised, and therefore they are also advertised. Then also we wanted to just discuss what an anchor tenant is in our view.
Back to what you've just said now, with all the benefits that you pointed out in having a one-stop shop area, premise, whatever you call it, would you say a standalone store, a supermarket chain, or what is your view on competition between a standalone store and a store located in a shopping center, would those stores compete? And if just give us the different permutations and bases
Sure.
for competition in a setting like that,
Us-
where you've got a store in a shopping center, and let's say 5 kilometers away from that store, there's another one.
I see Mr. Nkuna is itching to answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, in my overview, I've given you my background.
Yes.
That I was running a standalone a butchery shop,
Yeah.
and how I realized that operating isolated alone, you won't be able to grow your turnover.
Yes.
Your turnover reach a limited, but you see, going into a organized development, which brings all the people, the likelihood, if you are a true business person, for you to increase the turnover, the chances are very high. And I've proven that myself.
Okay.
I'm talking from experience.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nkuna. So just going on with the presentation, what is an anchor tenant and what role does it play in shopping centres or malls? So in our view, an anchor tenant is our main tenant. It's usually a national chain or department store. It attracts not only retail customers, but other tenants as well. They occupy a large space. I think we know that. And often in Masingita's case, this is a supermarket or large grocer that offers a wide range of goods and services in their premises. Ancillary tenants, you asked in one of your questions what an ancillary tenant is. We just want to get the definition between the two from Masingita's view. Ancillary tenants are smaller tenants. They occupy less space and they have a smaller offering due to the limitations of their GLA. They're usually specialty or independent stores. Ancillary tenants will generally follow anchor tenants. Once they know we have an anchor tenant, they'll approach us to take occupation in our shopping centres. Anchor tenants also generate a lot more feet than ancillary tenants. Just generally, ancillary tenants don't generate traffic by themselves. They need to be in a group and will also follow the anchor tenant. One of the other questions was... yes.
Just a second.
Sure.
On your answer on anchor tenants, you said an anchor tenant would be a supermarket or a large retailer. Do you have, as Masingita, do you have a list of, is that list confined for you as to who you choose from? Is it a confined list? Or
No.
It depends on where your development
No,
is?
it's not. Just from Masingita's view, and our developments, our anchor tenant is generally a supermarket or grocery tenant. But it's not specific to one specific retailer, if that's what you're asking.
Do you have a list that you've confined, not just one, but do you have a list that you've confined yourselves to that is ideal or
I
only
think-
anchor tenants to
Yeah, I think we're
consider?
going to unpack that a little bit later when we get into the questions and answers.
Okay, sure.
We get quite specific into that, Madam Chair, if that's okay with you.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Just following the presentation in terms of tenant mix, how our tenant mix is determined. A tenant mix is very much demand-driven, tenant demand-driven. So when we advertise a new development, we get a specific demand from tenants who will approach us in order to take occupation in the new development. The demand in the primary and secondary catchment areas, so as Marcelo and Mr. Nkuna alluded to, there's a demographic study done and we focus in on that and to cater for the needs of that community. The LSM profile, as I've mentioned, in the catchment area, and then also the land parcel size and the parameters of the development. So in the demographic, it'll unpack what the prescribed development size should be, and that's also equated to the land parcel size. And sometimes we have zoning restrictions, so we can't put a specific type of tenant into our development, so that also dictates it a bit. And the location. So we obviously, Marcelo alluded to location, that also comes into terms with the decision and the tenant mix that we put together. There's also financial requirements that 70% need to be national brand tenants. The definition of a national tenant is a retailer that has a footprint in all 9 provinces of South Africa. That is their definition of a national tenant, the financier. They're not prescriptive to the type of tenant that we put into the shopping centre, but we need to prescribe to the 70% national take-up in a new development. The reason for this is due to the financial risk and for us to have longevity in that shopping centre. I just want to get to I think Mr. Nkuna covered the other two. The impact of Masingita shopping centres or malls in rural areas. I think we've touched on that, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Something we also wanted to mention is the entrepreneurial growth. When we go in and develop a shopping centre, the surrounding standalone stores, and we've put an example of a pharmacist. So we developed a shopping centre, and one of our tenants were Clicks. There was a pharmacist that had occupation across the road, and Clicks ended up taking in that pharmacist to their store to operate the pharmacy and their license. So they actually became entrepreneurs and business partners with Clicks. It's just something that we wanted to allude to as well. Around the mall, we also find that smaller businesses start to mushroom, and we have hawkers around our shopping centre, all benefiting from the foot traffic that has been driven by the new shopping centre in these rural and township locations. We also just want to touch on the exclusivity clauses. We will obviously unpack this in our questions, but just as a brief overview. So we stop smaller independent grocers and butchers to enter into our shopping centres. Often the exclusivities are prescribed on the size of the shopping centre. So if we're building, say, a 15,000 square metre shopping centre, there'll be a supermarket, and we'll always ensure that there's provision for entrepreneurs and smaller butchers surrounding the area to take up occupation. Thank you. I'd like to hand back to Mr. Nkuna.
Thanks very much, Edward. You'll realize that, we've got, your questionnaire, and we have dealt with some of the issues that were concerned in detail. And if you look, at the back here, you'll see your questions and answers in details. But I'm not saying that, if you feel you want to ask question, you mustn't ask us question. You are at liberty to ask any question. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. I just want to go back. In your slide, I just want to see if I don't have any question before that one. Okay, just to go back to the question that I asked, which you said we must park until you finish the presentation on anchor tenants, and whether or not Masingita has a confined list of anchor tenants that you choose from. Are they grocery retailers in Masingita's view that only can qualify as anchor tenants, and are these confined? Are these confined in, or is this dependent on an area, rural, township, urban? How does it work for you? Can you just expand on that question for us?
Thanks. we don't have, a confined, tenants or list. But you see, it depends on, the circumstances. I'll give you an example. Let's assume, I want to go and develop something in Malamulele. And you find that, one particular developer has developed and you put, ShopRite as an anchor tenant. And I then assess, the market. And after assessing the market and feel that, there's an opportunity to put another development. And obviously, I'll go and check which, anchor tenant can, satisfy the needs of, the people in that particular area. That's how we work.
Okay, in doing so, are you confined in terms of the list that you choose from? Is it a limited number, ShopRite, Pick and Pay, Spar, and that's it? Or because when Mr. Woodberg was talking, he said anchor tenants or large retailers. So I wanted to see how wide is that group for Masingita? How broad a group is?
Well, it's quite large, it cannot be limited to the number that, you have just alluded to. Because sometimes, you see, you find that there are supermarkets that, are more on the franchise, and if you find that, the operator, can serve the purpose, you end up talking to him. I'll give you an example whereby, I've got a smaller shopping center, which, because once you are in retail, it's in your blood. You can't move out of it because you become addicted. So I felt that, I don't need, the ShopRite or Pick and Pay. I went and get, a franchise, a supermarket. Because sometimes Pick and Pay, they offer a franchise. And then I went and get, a franchise of OK. I'm presently running that supermarket, and I'm competing with, ShopRite, Boxer, Pick and Pay, and Spar.
You define that shopping center as a smaller center. Would that be 12,000 square meters?
That one, it's 7,000 square meters.
7,000 square meters. Okay. And does it? Can I ask maybe a more specific question? Do you have Choppies as your anchor tenant anywhere in your shopping malls, especially in the rural areas, townships where you have developments?
Currently, I don't have Choppies, but I can tell you that the CEO of Choppies is coming to see me on Monday. I've got an appointment. We're currently talking because we cannot limit ourselves.
You're not limiting yourselves?
No, I can't.
And then there's also if you look at your slide 17, the impact of Masingita's shopping centers or malls located in rural areas or townships. What would you say is the impact there? Is it positive? Is it negative? Especially on other retailers that may have existed prior to the mall or center that you developed?
To us, it's very positive. And if you look from areas that, we've been developing, we were able to urbanize those areas. And you'll find that, the spin-off in terms of, developing in that whole area grows. And more people are coming into the area. More people are starting to go for franchises. So you find that, we have made a big difference in the life of, the people in those areas.
Can you speak to, can you just give us
Madam Chair?
Sorry?
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I can just give you some other examples just based on that question. Masingita also believes that competition is good for the community. And I'll give you examples. So Malamalele, which is a very small town, currently has 3 shopping centres, of which 2 is owned by Masingita, and the third existing one is by a fund. Giani has 5 shopping centres, of which out of those 5, 3 is owned by Masingita. Currently, one of its larger regional shopping centres that we're developing, one of the smaller 12,000s into a 45,000 square metre, is Masingita. So as long as there's a primary catchment and there's a demand for it.
Is that in Giani?
That's in Giani, yes.
Okay.
As long as there's a primary catchment and there's a demand, which our demographics and surveys and studies would indicate, your retailer would also do a similar example and study, and that would indicate whether they would have a viability in the area. I don't know if that's answered the question.
No, it does. I just wanted to also get a sense of where most of your developments are as Masingita. Where would you be located? Are you an urban shopping center developer found in Sandton, or are you more focused on in the rural areas or townships? If so, are you still focusing on certain provinces, in certain provinces, and less so in other provinces? Just give us a fair sense of where Masingita operates as a business, or has been up to now.
Thanks, Madam Chair. When I was giving my overview, I've alluded that, we chose, to focus in township and rural areas. We didn't want to come to the urban areas and compete, with, those big, property funds that are operating within the urban area. So we created our niche business by focusing in township and rural areas. Insofar as, which area or which provinces, we develop in any province where, we can find, a suitable land which will satisfy, our needs. Currently, we have just completed, a very good development of about 25,000 square meter in Tabong in the Free State, because the municipality there, they were creative and they wanted to create something and, provide, services closer to the people. So they invited us, and when we assessed the land and we find that, the land was suitable, and we then completed that development, 2 years ago. So we can go anywhere.
I know you've said there are spin-offs for the local retailers and traders where your malls have been built, but we've also had people who've come forward here to say where these malls have been built and complaining quite bitterly about municipal land having been given up or sold to developers. I won't say like yourselves, but to developers. To build malls, and how they them as citizens of those areas, how them as traders and business people of those areas have never been considered by the local authorities. To what extent do you work with and bring in these local business owners in the area into your shopping area, into your shopping centers, especially your area, because your area of focus is where these complaints are coming from?
Yeah,
townships and rural.
Yes, let me answer it in this fashion. I've indicated to you when I started, this, conversation that, I come from a background of being a retailer, and I was running a butchery, right? And, because you see, I was a visionary, I told myself and subject myself to say I want to compete. And I would simply say, in a nice way, because you see, if, you want to grow and you want to be competitive and sometimes have an opportunity to go out there and compete with the world, you need to subject yourself to competition. So I often hear people talking about that, the big malls that have come into, the township have killed the smaller, shops. My answer to that is no. To those, who are not selfish, because you see, when big malls come into townships, they are also creating jobs. Because you see, you must bear in mind, if it was only a corner shop standing there, you wouldn't be able to employ, 2,000 people. You'll end up with 3 people. So what, our people need to understand is to say, we also want to be a top developer or top business people. And you cannot be a top business people if you want protection, and in other words, you don't want, to compete. And you want to go into a race course and run the race alone. To me, that it doesn't make sense. I believe that, if, we then tell ourselves that, we want to achieve something and we work on it. And, we'll be able to be competitive. And, look, I'm sitting here competing with the likes of Redefine. I'm sitting here competing with the likes of, Resilient. I'm sitting here competing with the likes of McCormick. I can count and count and count. But you see, because you see, I said I'm going to make it. And I'm busy, competing. And when I come into an area, they know that, I'm going to give them a challenge.
Mr. Ngona, it might be easy for you to say that as a property developer. But when you speak as a retailer, and this is the argument we've listened to, and we've also raised to some of the complaints that were put to us. If you're a retailer coming from a certain area, and then a mall comes, and depending, let's say if a ShopRite or Pick n Pay, a big supermarket chain is located in that shopping center, are you saying that they need to be visionaries, or the traders outside the shopping center need to be visionaries to enable themselves to compete against this entity that is huge, that has had the benefit of history in building themselves, establishing themselves into a sizable business that financially has financial muscle, that can purchase volumes of goods and therefore benefit from discounts, which local and which a smaller corner shop cannot really afford to do. So how visionary are you asking these people to be against this background? These are the questions that this is what, when people complained, this is what they came to us and said, that pre-94, this is who we were. We had no access to finance, no access to our assets. We didn't own any assets. And then come 1994, we wake up, there'll be land, you knock on a municipality's door trying to find land. No offer would be made to you as local businesses to expand your businesses. And then you wake up one day, there's a mall, I remember specifically, there was a person from Tembisa who had gone, who had seen a site and thought, I want that site for my business. And he went to 3 different municipalities and got no answer. And the next thing he heard, he was telling us at this hearing that the next thing he heard, that site was being sold. And he didn't even know who the owner was. And he had tried to establish this on his own. So these are the challenges that some people, some of the retailers on the ground who are not in property development, who are, all they're doing is to sell grocery. They don't understand what's happening with property. And these are the dynamics that they're facing. So are you saying these small corner shops that who have had ambitions to grow and looked around, there was just no possibility pre-94 of growing themselves beyond being a corner shop, and then come 1994 they wake up, there's a big mall on their doorstep. how are they supposed to grow?
Maybe, thanks, Madam Chair. Maybe let me answer it like this, but you see, once I'm finished, I'll give it, I'll open a floor for my colleague to also add. Maybe let me put it like this. Let me remove the cap of a developer and talk as a retailer, so that you can find a fair comparison. I've just indicated here that currently, I decided to take a franchise, and the reason I've done that, I wanted to create some jobs for the local people in that area. And I ended up taking a space of about 1,006 and put an OK, a supermarket, which is a franchise, right? And you look within the surroundings. Spa, they have got, 2 supermarkets.
Sorry, Mr. Ngwena, when you say take, what do you mean? Acquire? Or did you give an opportunity to an existing franchise that was not owned by you, and then you put them in your center? What do you mean by take?
No, I acquire myself.
So, okay.
I acquire, from somebody who was running that supermarket, but you see, he was not making an impact. So I acquired that, supermarket and say, I want to run it myself. And you look within the area, there are 2 big supermarket Spa. There's a Pick and Pay, there's a Boxer, and Boxer, they've got 2 stores, and ShopRite. And apart from that, there are several Somalians. By the way, Somalians are very good, retailers. How they do it, I don't know. But you see, I'm competing with them because you see, what they do, they are very creative. This big supermarket, you find that sometimes they compete amongst themselves, and sometimes, they sell goods for nothing in order to call people into their supermarket. So what Somalians do, when they have this big special, this big supermarket, they go and take everything at below cost, right? And when the special passes, and then they go and sell it at the same price that they're selling. So it's being creative. So people's mind is that we don't want anyone to come here. We can go and sell, goods, at a high expensive price. Consumers suffers because you want to dominate the area. So what, I've done, I wanted to prove a point that, it's possible. And then let me tell you this again. I come from a rural area called Nkuzana. My old mother, may her soul rest in peace, she was running, a corner shop. Like, what I've seen, the former president, Thabo Mbeki, his mother was also running a corner shop. So what happened is that, when she died, I felt that, I cannot let, this, a legacy die. Because I've got grandchildren. I want my grandchildren to know that, their grandma was running, a spaza shop. I went in there in a village, and the majority of shops that were run by our people are no longer run by them. All of them, they've sold them to Somalians. So I then said, I want to prove that, we can also do it. And I can tell you, Somalians, they're wondering, how am I doing it? So it's about creativity. How you want to run your own business. I've removed the development head. Now I'm talking about the head of retail, because I know both.
Is it not creativity that's backed up by some financial muscle? that those people in those areas wouldn't have?
I've just given an example that, as a child myself, when, you are an entrepreneur, you come with creativity. I remember, I used to sell loose draws. And I remember in the early days, when, we had soccer matches in Orlando Stadium, I'll go and buy, extra tickets and resell them in the stadium. That's creativity. It's not about, financial muscle.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add to Mr. Nkuna's creativity, generally in the rural areas, there's a lot of stokvel groups that start to accumulate. So it's a few families that get together and put money aside for Christmas, and when they make food and so forth for each other. So they start arranging food parcels a year in advance. So being creative would be the family, the person in the community that knows that there's a lot of stokvels going around, going to a cash and carry or going to a big wholesaler and doing a bulk order and being able to offer a better price to the people. And that when December comes, he's got a bulk order price secured, no escalation on the pricing, he puts down a deposit and he's able to sell it and make a markup on. So there's various factors which have been able to be used. But if I could just touch back on a few points of your questions, we have outlined it.
Sorry,
Sure.
Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if you are familiar with other parts of this inquiry. For instance, we are looking at that area of competition between local people and several other groups.
Foreign nationals.
Well, yeah, if people of other national descent, because some of them are now South African, so we are looking at that, and I'm not sure how much, even to Mr. Nkuna, how much you've heard about business practices in that area. I mean, what you described, we can sum it up as resourcefulness, but taking on the example of stokvels, as Mr. Mino was alluding to, we've heard, even from cash and carries, that there are different pricing strategies, whether or not you are buying the same amount of goods as other groups or not. I mean, what else could you, as resourceful business people, suggest that those who don't have access to this preferential pricing, even from cash and carries and other wholesalers, what else can they do to enhance their competitiveness?
Look, your summary, which you say, it's more on the resources. I'll disagree with you. I'll always revert back to myself because you see, when I started, I didn't have money. Because all what I had the will, and sometimes you see, you need to subject yourself and go and borrow money, and when you start, you'll find that it won't be cheap. It will be costly. But myself, because you see, I wanted to achieve something, and I've borrowed money to various institutions, and that helped me to to manage to buy if I'm no longer talking as a developer now, I'm talking as a retailer, because that's where I started. So you'll find that when I go and talk to the people that were supplying meat, I'll negotiate. Because again, what you must do as a business, if you go to somebody and say, I'm coming to buy, and he says, his price is this, and you don't negotiate, he'll just take it because he wants to make money. So if you are a businessman and you want to achieve something, you'll negotiate because you'll know your surrounding and what you can sell because you'll have to do your own market research and say, if I sell this at this price, then people will buy. So when you go to the wholesaler, you'll have to negotiate, right? So that's what I've seen with these guys that are coming from outside the boundaries. They are good negotiators. And the other thing that my mother was doing, which attracts people to go and support her, and she offered people credit facilities. She'll give them a bag of meal, and then when their husbands send money back home, they go and pay, and then she'll give. That's how she sustained her business. And I see even the big supermarkets. I heard recently that Pick and Pay wants to do that. So it goes back to creativity.
Mr. Nkune, I hear you, even that credit facility strategy or creativity, that we're not hearing that for the first time. Black business people, those small retailers in the townships, in the rural areas, have been doing that for years. Yeah. That's how they sustain those communities in the first place. So that we know. But what we are saying is it how creative can they be against a big supermarket chain? I think we do need to agree at some point they will run out of creativity. Don't you think they will run out of creativity faced with a big player that can really sell products at a lower price, at a lower price than they can afford to, and and some of them have exited the market on this basis. So I don't know how far your creativity can take you without a financial backing, because for you to have money, you said you had to do it in an expensive manner. Yes. That expensive manner for them, it meant going to, this is what I'm speaking on, I'm basing this on submissions that we received. It meant going to knock on a door of a bank, asking for loan, and if you have no asset, you had no way of obtaining any loan from a bank. So you needed a collateral for any loan that you obtained from a bank, and because they were not asset owners, they were not able to do that. So they were not as fortunate as some people were, and I think you were one of those people because you had an asset. They didn't. So the dynamics are not quite, it's not comparing apples to apples. There are dynamics in certain cases, and this is what we're trying to understand about that question, where these people had no assets whatsoever, had no way of obtaining financial funding from banks, and this is what happened. This is the complaint this is what we've been told. Let me put it that way. So I'm putting their arguments to you, okay, as a developer, as a retailer, wearing both hats and okay, giving us an insight as to how to address these.
Okay. Let me, I think I understand you exactly what you're saying. Yeah. If you look, when I started, I started during apartheid, right? Yeah. And of which, there were no other institutions that helps, and even though I had these noble ideas of running a business, I couldn't go to the institutions that we have today in our country. If you look currently, we've got the DTI, which offers some grant if you come with a noble idea and you are able to put a business plan properly, they give you a grant. And then we've got institutions such as National Empowerment Fund, and those institutions, they are looking for entrepreneurs that can come and say, I've identified a development that is happening in Chawela, and I believe that I can have a supermarket, and this is my business plan. And National Empowerment Fund, they finance such people. So if you look then and now, it's much easier for a black person to access cash as compared to when I started during apartheid time.
Okay. And I still want to say that you started during apartheid times when you also had an asset in your hand.
No, I didn't have an asset, sorry ma'am. I didn't have any asset.
Okay.
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I can also just, before we ask another question, if I can also just go through a few facts, because I hadn't been given the chance to finalize a few facts on the retail. So just from our side, yeah, a shopping center in short term does have some side effects to the smaller retailers. We're not saying that it doesn't. It does have some smaller side effects. But in long term, it has a much beneficial effect. If I can just go through some things that we've prepared. Yeah. Larger retailers can compete on price and offering, and in some cases...
It's on your...
Yeah.
He's reading from the question and answers.
So I'll just go through some of the things we prepared. Take away from the independent retailer. However, developing a shopping centre mall creates a better economic opportunities for all. I know we keep touching on this, so excuse me if we're repeating it. It's just because of all the various answers, etc. Traders located close to shopping malls often benefit due to such proximity. The spillover effect that brings more feet to the trader too. For example, close to malls, there are often value marts which have a mixture of tenants, some brand names, factory stores, independents, etc. Traders also are not specified according to time in which they have to trade, whereas a shopping centre has a timeline where you can only trade from 7:30 to 5 or to 6. So often traders open up at 6 before people go to school, and some close later. We just, as example, we do make provision in our centres for traders, either hawker stores, etc., where we have made allowances for traders to be able to come in, so they're not subjected to the rental that would be charged in a shopping centre. The rise of township-based shopping centres or malls introduced by Masingita in rural areas has contributed to change in the shopping experience, which benefits consumers. As Mr. Nkuna expressed, like SASA, home affairs, etc., generally you'd have to travel 30 or 40 kilometers for this. Your travel time has been shortened, money used on transport, etc., can now be used in the primary catchment. So whether it is to your local store owner that you know or to the shopping centre, the experience is now more focused on. So your catchment area becomes a bigger growing factor, which I think is very important, because a lot of times you travel further out to go get what you needed because your stores close by didn't offer it. So your money expenditure is happening more around the area. In order to have access to large variety of items and in order to purchase bigger or more expensive items, residents were forced to spend their savings on public transport, which I'd explained. Shopping centres enhance trading conditions and offer opportunities to local retailers to grow their business offering. They are also avert this in the primary catchment area. Then what I'd like to say is that the building of shopping centre or mall attracts other business and residential development. So generally what happens is you see a big growth of residential development also happening around the shopping centre due to the job offerings, due to its locality of where it is, and that you're closer to your primary needs, which is food, etc., for your family. Because the husbands all work away, like we said, and they send their money in. Thus the community grows, which benefits, again, on the long term, it benefits the independent retailer. Competition benefits the consumer. The retailer has to focus on customer service, improving their range of stock and services, and on being price competitive. An independent retailer with a good track record can benefit from the entry of a large development into a township or rural area, since independent retailers are sometimes invited by chain stores to operate under their brand. Thus, independent retailers are empowered and receive training and get the opportunity to join the formal trading sector. What we have seen on a few occasions is, for instance, we've had a beauty store, beauty salon, beauty store, optometrist, and the local ladies, what they did is they both got together and they created one store. So you go for optometrist, you go for your hair, then they combined it for a nail salon, and it wasn't the first. When we developed another shopping centre, they grew with us. We found that our pharmacist started trading in fast foods, and he started doing fast foods. certain stores like a OBC, what they would do is they would take someone which is local, which wanted a butcher, and they would assist with financing or achieving financing from, is it DTI, etc. So then they would get them into a franchise position. As we discussed, Clicks, what they'd taken is someone with a license, included them in their store, a franchisee, and they continued. We've had that on a few occasions. Masingita is sensitive to the social economic conditions in townships and is focused on the needs of the community in which they do business. And I think this is a very important point from us. And it's something that we do strive for, hence us looking at rural areas. Thank you.
You're welcome. I will. I think we're towards the end of our questions. I have two questions. The first one is, I guess, let me start with this question because it kind of follows up with what we've been discussing. To what extent does Masingita bring in those entrepreneurs in the area into your shopping, or enable them to actually operate in your shopping centers, the ones in the township, rural areas? To what extent do you make it possible for your smaller traders, smaller players, other than hawkers, people who want to operate a business and want to have walls and a proper business? What initiatives are you doing in those areas? Are you making in those areas to bring those players in, rural and townships?
Well, look, Masingita, take an extra mile, in uplifting, our people. If I can tell you about, several, not one, several people that, I've uplifted. There's one guy called Shirinda. He's a pharmacist by profession. He was working for Discam, and I managed to tell him that, I'm going to develop a shopping center in a certain area. Come, I'll take you up so that, you can apply for the pharmacy license. Because currently, our government wants to give license to the smaller player. And indeed, off-plan, we showed him where we want a pharmacy, and indeed he applied, for pharmacy license. And, when we opened, he operated that store for 6 months, and he realized that he's making money. He approached me to say, what else can I do? And I said, the other area that you can go into the food, area, which, you can place it next to your store. And I went, insofar as, negotiating for a franchise with, Steers and Debonairs. And, we also helped him to raise, the funding. And, this guy now, he's a super guy. And I'm not talking about him only. I can talk about more than 20 of them, all right? So it depends on the will of people, whether, they want to participate in a meaningful way, or they want to go and sit down there and complain and thinking that, things will come. Nothing will come if, you don't try and uplift yourself. Only you yourself can uplift yourself. That's the feeling that, I have insofar as that uplifting other people.
Madam Chair, sorry if I can just add to what Mr. Nkuna is saying here. Part of our leasing strategy when we develop a new shopping centre is that between 10 and 15% of the gross lettable area goes to line shops and independent retailers. Yeah. And if you think of 10 or 15% of 20,000 square meters, that's 2,000 to 2,500 square meters, made up of shops between 30 to, say, 200 square meters. So it's quite a number of independent retailers taking up occupation in our shopping centres.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And
Can I add something? Recently, I was approached by, the Minister of Small Business, Ma'am Lindy Wezulu. She was asking me, how can we assist, the smaller, players to come into, this big development and play a meaningful way. My suggestion to her, I was saying that, currently the custodian of the land now, it's government or municipalities. So if we can find a way whereby, when, these big developers come and, try and buy land for development of shopping center, we can then say, we'll sell you this piece of land, but adjacent to it, we'll make, a concession of that land, so that, as you design the bigger shopping center, you try and develop smaller shops that will be incorporated in the mainstream. But you see, those shops dedicated for the smaller player at no cost. Because you see, if you put a high cost on that land, my focus will be, I'm going to raise money to do a development. Whoever is going to finance me will want a repayment. So I won't be able to accommodate as many smaller players as possible because I'll be restricted. But if, government come in and say, we are prepared to move with you, in some instance, we may take the land cost and say, we're not going to charge you the land cost, and then the land cost will go towards creating, the smaller shops for smaller players.
Yeah.
I think that will solve the problem.
Yeah, definitely. It would certainly solve the problem, and as well as doing it retrospectively in areas where there already exist these kind of malls, which have had a negative impact on those communities where they're located. Yes, I agree with you. And then you also mentioned on page 20 that you've also had some exclusive clauses waived. Are you comfortable giving us a sense of how many, like, is that happening a lot? And then do you want to discuss that publicly, or would you rather keep that confidential as to who has waived, which retailers have waived their confidentiality, and in which areas?
Well, I'll answer that one. I don't want to discuss it confidentially.
Yeah.
Because you see, it happened. When I started. I wanted to take Boxer in Guyana, and at that time,
What do you mean by take?
I wanted a Boxer to come as an anchor tenant.
Okay, sure.
Right, because most of the other shops were already in existence.
Yeah.
So because they didn't know the area and they didn't know whether they'll succeed, and they said the only way we can come, we'll have to put an exclusive clause,
Yes.
and it was the first Boxer in that whole area.
In the Guyana area.
Well, not Guyana. I would simply say from Polokwane downwards.
Okay, sure.
Not, I would say Northern Transvaal or Limpopo.
Okay.
It was the first Boxer.
Okay.
So obviously, if you go into an area which you don't know, you'll put condition in order to protect your investment, bearing in mind that they spend a lot of money in terms of tenant allowance, and to shop fit that whole shop, it cost a lot of money. So, and myself, I wanted to enter that market. I had to subject myself to that.
Sorry, sir, before, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would you say Boxer was the first store of its size in that area at that time?
No. There were other stores, like a Pick and Pay, like Spar. They were big, but you see, I saw that there will be a market for another a big store and to create a proper shopping mall.
No, I'm just trying to understand what was so novel about them, about their existence in that area to justify the exclusivity in the presence of the other players in the market who were still making money, who were operating and not exiting the market.
We didn't go to that extent, ma'am, because you see, all what I was looking at, developing a mall, and I had already secured the other tenant who were willing to come, and they were saying that if you have a good anchor tenant, and then we'll be able to come.
Sure.
So myself, I was focusing mainly into developing a mall, and I'm happy today, they've waived, those clauses because, I'm increasing that development to 45,000 square meter.
Okay. And this will enable other boxers, competitors to come into that?
Well, ShopRite is coming, Game is coming.
Okay. After
Woolworth
how
is
many
coming.
years? After how many years?
After 10 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And then the other... the other question that I had for you, I remember reading some of the documents. Did you own the property where in Diepsloot where ShopRite is located, that mall there?
Yes.
Yamasingita.
Yeah, but see, I've sold it.
Okay. Well, is it are your reasons for selling confidential?
Well, it's not confidential. Development is highly capital intense. And you don't want a situation whereby, you develop one and say, I've arrived and sit back. And if, you want to grow, you then say, how do I raise, equity? Because, you see, you want to continue with, development. So I was approached because, you see, most of the property fund, they are afraid, they don't take risk of developing. They prefer to buy, when you have completed, because you see, now the valuation is based on the yield, and what happened in this instance, PIC came to me and said, can we buy? And I look at the price, and the price was good, and I wanted to do some other development. That's what kept me going. Okay. So some I'll keep, some I'll sell.
Okay.
For purpose of growth.
Yes. At the time you sold, was the Roots Butchery that is just outside of that shopping center where ShopRite is?
Roots was part of that.
They're outside the center though.
No, that's quite a recent development.
Okay, I wanted to find out if were they there already.
No, there's a Hyper SA Butcher inside that Diepsloot Mall.
Okay.
And then adjacent to it, there's a new building that houses Roots and Nazams.
And
Nazams. It's a dry goods retailer.
Okay, yeah.
So the Roots will be doing the meat and chicken, and Nazams will be doing the dry goods.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And who are the? Who did you sell to?
PIC at that time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Fine. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Nita.
Thanks very much.
Should we have any further questions for you that may be specific to some of the developments that you own? We will come back to you in writing, and we will review the answers you've given. And should we require any clarification based on these questions, we will come back to you. Thank you very much for coming, and we do really appreciate your presence today and attendance. Really, truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And in closing, I would want to say, if you find that those laws of exclusivity are not good, will be happy because you see they will benefit us.
How about if I said be creative, Mr. Masingit, Mr. Nkuna, be creative?
Still be creative. Whether they are there or not, I'll be able to move forward.
That's where the answer lies. Be creative, Mr. Nkuna. Thank you. Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of the hearings today. We will resume on Monday. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much.